Good morning, it's 8:36 on News Radio KWOS. I'm Austin Petersen here with John Marsh, and you're listening to the KWOS Morning Show. A young Instagram influencer is whining that learning about World War II harms millennials' mental health. Freddie Bentley said he thought that the school's curriculum on this devastating conflict should be cut back because it was, quote, so intense. He says, World War II, I don't want anyone to think I'm being disrespectful. I just remember thinking as a child, oh my God, it's so intense. Here to discuss is the original Rosie the Riveter, played by Steffi Cole. Good morning, Rosie. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you here. And so what do you think, Rosie? Do you think that it's important for our young people to learn about World War II?
Absolutely. I mean, look at these millennials. They kind of like socialism.
Oh, they do.
Okay, that's a problem.
And that's what we were fighting in World War II.
Exactly. So you got to learn about World War II so you can see why socialism is bad.
Now, you, before you came over here this weekend, we made a little trip so that you could pick up some Rosie the Riveter socks. You have been immortalized in some socks. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I took a trip to Samuel's in Jeff City. And I love that place. The guys there were so friendly, and I got my Rosie the Riveter socks. I wanted to get George Washington socks too, but I just couldn't buy them all. And they have a super cute toy section.
They absolutely do. Now, Rosie, tell us a little bit about your history. You were modeled after an actual woman who served in factories during World War II. Can you give some background details about the original Rosie?
Sure. So the actual Rosie in the We Can Do It poster, she's Naomi Parker Fraley. And they actually discovered that many, many years after that was done. But Rosie the Riveter represents millions of women in the workforce during World War II. Men went off to war. The women were at home. They were housewives. And they needed to fill this void. They needed to take these jobs in factories and shipyards. So Rosie represented a lot of women.
And she really represented a change in the working behavior of women and the attitude towards women and what they could accomplish. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it was so empowering to women. Rosie represented strength.
Yeah, and she inspires you in such a way. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, she makes me feel confident just being her.
So tell me, why did you choose Rosie the Riveter to be your Halloween costume? Why does she inspire you personally?
I think she's just so bold and confident, a go-getter, and that's what I want to be as a woman. I want to be that strong woman influence.
Tell me, you're portraying Rosie the Riveter today. She's a strong working woman. You were really interested in the conversation that we were having on this show a couple weeks ago about being a 50s housewife.
Yes.
Now, being dressed as Rosie the Riveter, that would imply that that you don't need to be a housewife, but you like the idea that women would have a choice to be one or the other, right?
Yeah, and actually after World War II was over, a lot of the women in the workforce went back home to be housewives. So it was expected that they were going to do that. So I think being a housewife is super fun. I actually have another costume that's a 1950s housewife. I should have worn it here as well. But,
so
I'm happy with both.
So tell us, when we talked about that concept of being a 1950s housewife, it generated quite a stir. But you popped in right away and said you would have no problem being a 50s housewife. It's 2019 now, but you say that, cooking, cleaning, picking up your husband's dirty underwear or his dirty socks, that being your job, you would be okay with that. Why?
It comes natural to me. Like, I just want to do that. When I see a dirty dish in the sink, I want to clean it. It's just part of who I am.
But it isn't for everybody, you might argue.
No. It's just me personally.
Sure.
I just like to be clean.
Yeah, but I guess, you're portraying a character right now that's the epitome of female strength. Some people would argue that seeing women as being in a position of where they should naturally want to stay at home and cook and clean, they would say that that's misogynist, that's patriarchal. Do you disagree with that?
I mean, to each his own, or her own, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, do what you want. Whatever you feel your calling is, that's fine with me.
Well, Rosie, do you think that that Rosie the Riveter was pivotal in changing the attitude towards women? That it was, because at the time, men's attitudes towards women was very different.
Yeah, and a lot of these propaganda posters that were used, they were actually used to convince the men as well that their wives should go to work. because the men were against it.
Yeah, I can imagine that they were, but the attitudes that men have towards women really did start to change around that time period, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say it built a lot of respect for women, and I know Rosie the Riveter is now used in a lot of feminist movements, so it's kind of changed a little bit, which I'm not so into, because I'm not a feminist.
Well, okay, wait a minute. Rosie the Riveter, not a feminist? I don't know about that one. Can you explain?
Well, I mean, I believe in female empowerment, but, you know, I'm just not totally over the edge and extreme with it.
So what do you have to do to get the perfect Rosie the Riveter costume? What are you wearing here? Can you describe this for our listeners who might want to be Rosie the Riveter?
Absolutely. I was shopping for this stuff for quite some time. So I got my blue jean jumpsuit at Forever 21. It was the very last one on the shelf, so you can't get it anymore. It's just mine. And then I also have a special Rosie badge. I have a polka dot headband from Claire's Boutique, and I have some work boots, you can't see them under the table, and some socks from Party City. So it's a complete outfit.
So that's how you get your Rosie the Riveter outfit. And of course you can get Rosie the Riveter socks over at our friend Samuel Bushman.
Oh yes,
absolutely.
They just have to be red.
They have to be red. Stephanie, Rosie, excuse me. Talking about changing attitudes and generational changes, one of the topics that we're talking about on the show today is the concept of, is millennials' hatred for the boomer generation unjustified? And we heard from a caller, Brandon Elson. He was complaining about the boomers and the national debt. Now, the boomers would have been the generation that you had, your kids as age. So Rosie the Riveter would have had kids. Those kids would have been the baby boomers.
Yes.
So just curious, do you think that Rosie the Riveter's kids are doing a good job in handling things with the national debt, with the wars that we had, and in Iraq and Afghanistan? She was making a face.
My facial expression. Sorry, I can't hide things.
How do you think your kids have done, Rosie?
Not very well. Look at our debt. We're like, what, $23 trillion in debt? Look at our endless wars. We're not bringing people home as much as I want to.
Well, I mean, you lived through that, the greatest conflict in human history.
Yeah, it killed 70 million people.
Yeah, 70 million people died in World War II, and it seems sometimes like the boomer generation, it looks down on the millennial generation. Now, the young people nowadays, do you think that the boomers might want to lighten up a little bit on the youngsters?
I think so. We should both build a respect for each other. I mean, I do make fun of the boomers a lot because they're not tech savvy. Sometimes I call them adult learners because they're just a little bit slower on those things.
And they type in all caps, of course.
Right? Oh, dear. And my mom, she signs her text messages with her name.
Well, she does. So every time she texts you, she sends her name along with it.
She used to. She's gotten better.
The boomers sometimes do have problems with the technology. Rosie the Riveter, played by Steffi Cole, thanks so much for coming on the show today. You can always, every Sunday, Steffi does Sundays with Steffi on the Libertarian Republic. This last one, she talked about Rosie the Riveter, so you can go and see her in her costume if you didn't get to catch us on the live stream today. Steffi Cole, thanks so much. Rosie the Riveter, you can do it. Thanks for coming on the show today. We appreciate you. Coming up, 20 terrible girl names that are awful, horrible, terrible, no good names. I'm going to talk about them because the article says that they're great names. We'll be back at 8:49 on News Radio KWOS, 950 AM and 104.5 FM.